a new challenge to the state's restrictions on abortion.
While there is technically a medical exception to the bans, no one knows what it means, and the state won't tell us.
The women pushing back against the Texas abortion ban, why they say it limits doctors from providing life-saving care, and how the state is fighting their case. A new development in an ongoing lawsuit over how the state handles children in foster care, why lawyers are asking the judge to hit Texas with an extreme penalty.
How I learned about fentanyl was finding my son in a fentanyl poisoning state, and that's how my son learned what fentanyl was too.
Texas facing a growing need to warn young people about the danger of fentanyl, how a new plan to spend millions could save lives. Hopes for a deal on border policy hit a roadblock on Capitol Hill.
We must secure the border. There cannot be any equivocation about it.
We dig deeper into the division behind the latest stalemate in Washington and how it's having an impact beyond the border.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. We're coming off a busy week for the state in court. Two high-profile laws approved at the Capitol faced legal challenges in hearings this week. One is a question of women's health, the other about regulating books on library shelves. We start at the Texas Supreme Court, where a group of women challenged the state's abortion ban. They claim it limits doctors' ability to act in emergencies and say they nearly died after doctors delayed medically necessary abortions. Capitol correspondent Ryan Chandler takes an in-depth look at the arguments from opponents and supporters of the ban.
These women and many more say the state tied their doctors' hands as they dearly wanted to give birth, but instead faced the risk of death.
After she was born, my placenta wouldn't deliver, and I was hemorrhaging.
Caitlin Cash describes her daughter as a miracle after multiple miscarriages, but this pregnancy threatened to end her life.
I lost over half of my blood volume after the delivery of my daughter.
Doctors arguing their trauma could have been prevented.
While there is technically a medical exception to the bans, no one knows what it means, and the state won't tell us.
At issue are these sections of the Human Life Protection Act, stating a doctor can perform an abortion if, in their reasonable medical judgment, a woman is at risk of death or substantial impairment. These women argue that doesn't give doctors enough clarity to act in good faith to save a mother's life, without fearing life in prison if the state disagrees.
It means that patients like my clients will continue to suffer. While I was sitting in the courtroom, my telephone rang with a call from another patient. This is real. It is happening every single day, and it is not going to stop.
Supporters of the ban point to state data showing that since the ban, 41 abortions have been performed in Texas under the medical exceptions.
We know that doctors are intervening and they are not being disciplined or prosecuted.
They say any farther clarification should be up to medical boards, not courts.
The language in the law is clear and allows a doctor to intervene.
These laws are bad for business.
Earlier in November, dozens of Texas companies told the High Court the ban is hitting their bottom line.
Businesses are suffering because of this confusion and chaos around treating complications during pregnancy.
Tech giants like Bumble say they're no longer all in on Texas.
We were hoping to really make Texas more of a hub and encourage, use programs to encourage that. I would say we have stopped that.
In a brief to the Supreme Court, companies cited stats from the Institute for Women's Policy Research, estimating the abortion ban costs Texas almost $15 billion a year. They say that's because employees are leaving Texas or looking for jobs elsewhere.
The idea that this is going to be the center and that we're going to try to, bring people from remote work into Texas is definitely not at the top of our priority list right now.
The medical sector seeing gaps as well. The Association for American Medical Colleges reports applications to Texas's OBGYN residencies fell more than 10% after abortion was banned.
We're going to start seeing fewer and fewer qualified doctors to care not just for pregnant women, but for women altogether in Texas.
The 40 companies laid out their support for the plaintiffs in Zarowski v. Texas. Amanda Zarowski says vague exceptions in Texas's ban nearly cost her life.
We were harmed, and this is wrong, and it shouldn't be happening.
But supporters of the law say it's the doctor's understanding of that law that's wrong.
We have to fill in that gap to protect mothers and their children to make sure that our laws are actually protecting life, not jeopardizing life. And so, there is work to be done. But unfortunately, there is a lot of myth out there.
In August, a Travis County court sided with the plaintiffs, barring the law from restricting doctors. But that ruling is now on hold as the state fights back in the high court. Ryan Chandler, State of Texas.
Texas lawmakers gave doctors a little leeway to provide abortions when women face serious pregnancy complications. House Bill 3058 gives specific exceptions for ectopic pregnancies and preterm premature rupture of membranes. That's when someone's water breaks too early. Governor Abbott signed the bill into law back in June. A Texas law designed to keep sexually explicit books out of public school libraries is back in federal court. A lower court put the law on pause. But on Wednesday, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments in the state's appeal to get it reinstated. The law requires booksellers to review and rate materials they sell to schools. Monica Madden looks closer at the arguments in and outside the courtroom.
Censorship of certain books in court Wednesday.
Reader is not a book ban. Texas's new law simply protects parents' rights to decide what materials their children will read.
This is about a prohibition at this moment in time against selling any books to Texas schools.
The state of Texas asking a federal appeals court to lift a ban on HB 900, also known as the Reader Act.
We're talking about books that they know are radically explicit, that they desire to put in the hands of children.
The law requires booksellers to rate every book before it is sold to a public school, specifically identifying sexually explicit content. Book People, the state's largest independent bookstore, is leading the lawsuit.
This is not our specialty. This is not what we do. What we do is we sell books. We're really just a middleman.
Its CEO says that it's a high burden for booksellers to read each and every book to make subjective determinations.
Really don't see a way for any of us to be able to comply with this law as written, not to mention just the amount of time it takes to read a book to be able to rate it.
Appellate judges not signaling how they may rule in this clash over free speech.
We appreciate counsel for both sides for the argument, and the case is submitted.
Monica Madden, State of Texas.
The law specifies 2 ratings for books that contain depictions of sexual conduct. Books deemed sexually explicit portray behavior considered patently offensive. Those books would not be allowed in school libraries. Books rated sexually relevant also depict sexual content, but those books can stay in libraries if they're part of the required curriculum. The law also requires parents to give written consent before their child could read those books. Again, the Reader Act is currently not being enforced while the legal challenge plays out. Digging deeper, a report by the American Library Association found nearly 700 challenges to library materials or services between January and August. The group says most were books written by or about a person of color or a member of the LGBTQ+ community. This is something we looked into as part of our investigative series Outlaw this year. A fifth of the country's state-level bills impacting the LGBTQ+ community were filed in Texas, according to a Human Rights Campaign analysis. Equality Texas tracked a record 141 such bills this year, and that's up from just 12 in 2015. You can find our in-depth reporting into what this trend could mean for the state's future in the State of Texas story on our website. Texas launches a plan to spend millions to fight fentanyl deaths as a mom calls for faster action.
Can't keep chasing it from behind, and time is of the essence, and I wish it was sooner.
Where the money's going and how the plan aims to save lives. Texas could face an unprecedented penalty for how it handles children in foster care.
There's about a half dozen areas they say Texas has just been recalcitrant and slow, and they're demanding that Texas get popped.
The new development in the ongoing court challenge and how it could affect children in the state's care. The state comptroller's office has revealed how Texas will spend tens of millions of dollars collected from opioid lawsuit settlement agreements. The funding will go toward education initiatives for students in K-12 schools, training for behavioral health care workers, and sending Narcan to communities in need. Our Monica Madden looks closer at how the funding could save lives.
2 years ago, the unthinkable happened to Austin mom Stephanie Turner.
I lost my son Tucker to one illicit Percocet pill. How I learned about fentanyl was finding my son in a fentanyl poisoning state, and that's how my son learned what fentanyl was too.
It's why she now advocates for education and resources to combat the opioid crisis.
We have got to educate, because I believe that if teenagers and others are aware of the dangers, they understand just how lethal this poison is, just how addictive it is, they can make better decisions.
Since 2020, Texas has received nearly $3 billion from opioid settlements from companies like Johnson & Johnson, Walgreens, and Teva. 3 years later, we're learning how some of that money will be used.
This is a combination of several different settlements that's come to the state of Texas.
Texas Controller Glenn Hagar chairs the council tasked with allocating these funds, which will roll out toward prevention and education measures within the next year.
What are the things that can be most targeted and effective for these dollars to deal with the crisis here in the state of Texas? Whether that is prevention, education at the K through 12 level, whether that it ends up being medication that can help those that are dealing with this crisis.
Lives are at stake.
While Turner is pleased to hear about the steps Texas is taking, she wants more action faster.
Can't keep chasing it from behind, and time is of the essence, and I wish it was sooner. I really do.
Monica Madden, State of Texas.
The council Hager's office oversees is tasked with distributing about 70% of the settlement money. The rest of the funds will be handled by local governments and the legislature. A new development in an ongoing lawsuit over how the state handles children in foster care. Why lawyers are asking the judge to hit Texas with an extreme penalty. Work toward a deal on border and immigration policy is at a standstill on Capitol Hill.
It's been 37 years since there's been comprehensive immigration reform.
Why both Republicans and Democrats are pushing back on the plan. A key hearing is scheduled Monday in an ongoing lawsuit over how the state handles children in foster care. Lawyers for some of those children are asking the judge to hit Texas with an extreme penalty. The legal battle has been going on for more than a decade. The state has already been ordered to pay fines for not meeting requirements outlined by a federal judge. Some of the complaints focus on how the state handles children without placement. Critics point to kids being housed in hotels, medications not being properly managed, and a slow response to abuse allegations. Now the judge is being asked to put parts of the foster care program in receivership. So what does that mean, and how would it affect Texas children in the state's care? For Insight, we're joined by Bob Garrett, Austin Bureau Chief for the Dallas Morning News. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Josh.
So you've been covering this story for years. What are the main problems that have led up to tomorrow's hearing?
Well, the biggest problem, if you had to point to just one, is the children that we used to sleep in CPS offices, and that was prohibited by the legislature, but they stay in hotels or motels or churches or makeshift settings, babysat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by CPS workers. And that is straining those workers, as you can imagine. I think about 40% of them, according to the judge's monitors, are spending 35 hours or more a month on just this sort of babysitting child watch duty, rather than doing their normal jobs, which is to be the eyes and ears for these kids, making sure they're safe and being their advocates in court.
The judge in this case has ordered the state to take action before. Have her orders led to any changes?
I think they have. I mean, I think even the children's lawyers and the judge's monitors acknowledge there have been a lot of improvements, but there's about a half dozen areas they say Texas has just been recalcitrant and slow, and they're demanding that Texas get popped.
And we've talked about some of the problems. How does the state defend itself?
Well, the state, of course, under Greg Abbott as Attorney General, fought this lawsuit tooth and nail, tried to get it killed, did not succeed. knocked out about half of the judge's remedy about 5 years ago on appeal to the appellate court in New Orleans. For a while, the Governor Abbott tried to play along and say, okay, we will comply. But earlier this year, Josh, he went to a much different strategy, hiring Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, the wife of one of the Fifth Circuit judges, gave him a $7 million basic amount of a bar tab, you might call it, and said, let's fight this more and see if we can get out of this lawsuit. So that's the drama. Is these, in other states, these suits have lasted, they can last decades. This one is, 14 years, going on 14 years old. And so that's the state is saying, first of all, the states should not be interfered with by a federal judge. And secondly, that we've gotten better.
Now, lawyers for the children are asking for parts of the foster care program to be put into receivership. What does that actually mean? I mean, that's a term that I don't think a lot of people were familiar with, if they haven't been following this for that 14-year saga that you're talking about.
Well, receivership is usually in a bankruptcy of a private company to take charge of the assets. In this instance, it would be appointees of the federal judge, Janice Graham-Jack, who would actually run parts of the foster care program. That's pretty unprecedented. It's not clear if she's going to do that. Only one place has it happened before, Washington, D.C., back in the 1990s.
Any indication of what to expect on Monday?
Well, I think we're going to be there all week, and the children's lawyers are going to put on a bunch of witnesses, and the state is going to put on even more witnesses. So it's going to be kind of a mini trial over whether the state of Texas should be held in contempt of court for just dragging its feet on improving foster care.
We'll see what happens. Bob Garrett, Dallas Morning News, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Hopes for a deal on border policy hit a roadblock on Capitol Hill.
We must secure the border. There cannot be any equivocation about it.
We dig deeper into the division behind the latest stalemate in Washington and how it's having an impact beyond the border. Work toward a deal on border and immigration policy stalled in the Senate. Both Republicans and Democrats in Washington say they don't like the current deal being crafted. It's delaying the passage of President Biden's funding request for aid to Ukraine and Israel. And as Anna Wernicke shows us, Texans on Capitol Hill are caught up in the division amid the debate.
Texas Democrat Veronica Escobar says for decades, immigration reform has stalled in Congress.
It's been 37 years since there's been comprehensive immigration reform.
This week, Senate Republicans were hopeful the dry spell was over.
This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure our border.
Republicans are demanding tougher border security policies in exchange for their support for President Joe Biden's $106 billion supplemental funding request. That includes aid for Ukraine and Israel.
Republicans will not allow the supplemental appropriation to proceed unless there are satisfactory policy changes that are designed to stop or stem the flow of people across the border.
But Democrats say Republicans' demands are unreasonable and are accusing Republicans of holding emergency aid for Ukraine hostage. And Hawaii Democrat Mazie Hirono says the Republicans' proposal would make the border crisis even worse.
Pitting vulnerable groups against each other, Ukrainians fighting an unjust invasion, and asylum seekers fleeing persecution is a recipe for bad policymaking. Democrats tried to tack on citizenship for Dreamers to the Republicans' plan, but that was shot down.
This is not an immigration negotiation.
And with both sides not willing to budge, a border deal by Christmas seems more and more unlikely. In Washington, I'm Anna Wernicke.
Texas Congressman Chip Roy called on lawmakers to work until they reach a deal, even if they have to give up their holiday break. But he and other Republicans drew a line in the sand that underscores why an agreement is unlikely.
I want to be unequivocally clear to the Speaker of the House, to Republican leadership. If the word Ukraine is uttered on the floor of the House of Representatives before we have secured the border, passed H.R. 2 out of the Senate, with the president signing it with metrics attached, that is an utter fail by Republicans. I want to be completely clear. We must secure the border. There cannot be any equivocation about it. There cannot be any half measures.
On Friday, a federal appeals court ordered Texas to remove a buoy barrier in the Rio Grande installed to block migrants. A lower court had already ordered the removal. The state appealed to the New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which temporarily blocked the order. But Friday's ruling from the Fifth Circuit upheld the order, saying the barrier violates federal law. Governor Abbott previously said the state would take the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Several House Republicans are continuing to push for the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne spoke on the House floor, saying he should be removed due to his handling of the border.
As long as Secretary Mayorkas remains in office, our border will remain unsecured and vulnerable to human and drug trafficking.
Republicans backed off plans to force a House vote to impeach Mayorkas. A House committee, however, is moving forward with the impeachment process. Mayorkas was in Texas on Wednesday. He met with Border Patrol leaders in Uvalde. Those meetings were closed to the media. Families of the victims of the Uvalde school shooting could soon get more answers about police response the day a gunman killed 19 children and 2 educators. A Travis County judge sided with news organizations in their lawsuit for access to Texas Department of Public Safety records of that day. Tuesday's ruling means DPS has less than 20 days to release records of that day. DPS could still appeal to block this latest ruling. DPS has said before that releasing records could interfere with ongoing investigations into the shooting and the response. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle, and we'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.